Theory, creators of Heavenly Sword, are back with Hellblade, a new digital offering that purports to be the first AAA indie game, but also strives to raise awareness about the realities of mental illness. Now, the whole phenomenon of message games has really hit its stride in the last few years. These experiences are normally just that, more of an experience than an actual game, usually built as a way for the creator to process their experience with the topic at hand. That Dragon Cancer is a good example of this. Many of these titles are often designed by a single creator on a very low budget, have limited interactivity and even more limited visuals. It's more about the message, you know? But what that also means is that these titles are often considered art house. A relatively small subset of the gaming community actually embrace these titles. Enter Ninja Theory. Obviously, the topic of mental illness, particularly psychosis, is one that's very close to the project manager's heart. But there was a reality to face here. Ninja Theory has never had what you would call a huge breakout hit. Heavenly Sword did alright for Sony, but that's mainly because of the dearth of PS3 exclusives that was available at the time. Enslaved was really good, but it didn't sell worth a damn for Namco. The Capcom contracted reboot of Devil May Cry was hated by much of the series' fan base and was a real underperformer. So how would the company, who was now working without a publisher, invest in a narrative-centric experience but make it more profitable than the typical indie message game? It would appear their answer was to wrap their message game sausage in the bacon of a third-person action title and call it the first AAA indie game. But does it really live up to both those aspirations? The story concerns a young picked woman named Senua, who is returning to her homeland after a long vision quest to try and take control of the darkness within. You see, Senua's mother was a seer, or oracle, the village shaman of sorts, who saw visions and heard omens whispered in hushed voices. Senua sees and hears these things as well, and because of this, when a plague hit their village, her people blamed her. Even her boyfriend, whose father died from said plague, blamed her for drawing the plague to their village. And so she defied her father and sought out to cure herself on her own. Eventually she returns, only to find her village and the people in it slaughtered by the Norsemen, including her boyfriend, who's given the infamous Red Eagle Viking execution. One of the evil spirits who haunts her tells her that their Norse gods have possession of her boyfriend's soul, and to free him, she must take his head back to Helheim, the Norse underworld, and reunite it with his spirit. Now, at the beginning of the game, a big disclaimer pops up expressing that you're going to be dealing with the topics of psychosis. So you go in knowing that Senua is not really a seer, not really an oracle. She's suffering from a mental disorder that was passed down to her by her mother. The thing is, the illness is expressed through visionary flares of light, whispering voices, seeing spirits of the dead, memories of past events brought to life before the player's eyes, and so on. Even the puzzles, which involve finding patterns where others would not see any, are inspired by psychosis, as people who suffer from it tend to see hidden meanings and connections to events that only make sense to them. And here's the real kicker. While all of those are indeed common symptoms of psychosis, they're also very common things that have already been shown in countless video games over the past several generations, but weren't expressed as mental illness. Instead, they were just shown as the protagonist actually fighting evil spirits, demons, having visions, being haunted by the ghosts of loved ones, and so on. A good example of this would be God of War 3. Without that disclaimer at the beginning of the game, there's nothing in Hellblade's runtime that would clue you into the fact that she's suffering from a mental illness, as opposed to just being an oracle like her mother who has no control over it due to her mother's death and so is constantly fighting dark spirits for control of her mind. Is it a discourse on the ravages of mental illness? Or an action game about a demon-possessed village witch trying to save her boyfriend's ghost? Were it not for that disclaimer at the beginning of the game, most would assume the latter. So from that perspective, Ninja Theory have muddled their message in the attempt to make it more palatable to the hardcore set and get some of that hardcore cash instead of the relative pennies of the San Francisco art house crowd, and hence have failed to make a game that truly raises awareness of their chosen cause. Simultaneously, it falls short as an action title as well. The controls themselves are tight and responsive, but there's just not much meat on this bone. Short of 3 boss fights, you'll be fighting the same 5 or 6 enemy types over and over and over again. Huge lumbering Norsemen in masks, some bearing shields, some just holding massive weapons, who each have a very distinct and incredibly predictable pattern of attack. You, in turn, have a weak slash, a strong slash, a block, a melee kick or shield breaker, a dodge roll, and a focus ability that you earn after fighting the Valravan boss that's essentially bullet time, and also utterly breaks what little balance the game has to its combat to begin with. You run up, stab, parry their blow, weak, strong, repeat. If they have a shield, you run up and kick, weak, strong, repeat. If it's a huge enemy with an axe or other large weapon, telegraph their swing, dodge roll to the right, weak, strong, repeat. And somehow, if the brain-dead AI does manage to flank you, no problem. Hit R2 to slow them down, hold down the run button, and hack and slash away as you quickly bounce from one bad guy to the next, almost like the Sonic homing ability, until they're all dead. In other words, think overly simplified 3D Zelda-style combat, or Dark Souls combat for dummies if you prefer. It really is that simplistic. There's very little skill required to dominate in the action portions of this game. Even cranking the difficulty up to hard does little to change this, since all it really does, as far as I can tell, is affect the number of hits it takes to kill you or your opponent. But if you can easily predict what every enemy is going to do before he does it, all that means is a longer battle of dodging the same predictable attacks and countering with the same couple of moves. In other words, hard mode is actually more boring. But 7th, some of you who've been kissing this game's ass as a masterpiece on Twitter might say. Later on in the game, the fighting really becomes much more rich and challenging and strategic because of the number of enemies on screen. Hogwash! If you're surrounded by enemies, the only real strategy to keep in mind is to never dodge backwards. Always dodge to the right or to the left. If you dodge backwards, you have the possibility of dodging right into a wall and then getting stuck on the environment with multiple guys right in front of you slashing away, and the only way to escape it is to let them nearly kill you and then start mashing dodge right in hopes that Senua recovers and performs said dodge roll before the killing blow is struck. But don't worry, if you do die, you'll respawn at the entry point of that battle, and if it's a battle with multiple enemy spawns, the waves you've already killed will stay dead. No, the only challenges that come from the heavier number of enemies later in the game comes from 2 sources. The aforementioned predilection of getting stuck on walls if you dodge roll backwards, and the auto-targeting. Listen close, gamers of old. Senua locks onto her opponents much like Link from Zelda in the 3D Zelda titles. Only Senua does it automatically. The problem is, there's no way to cycle the lock between enemies on screen, and Senua has a bad habit of locking onto the enemy directly in front of her 15 feet away, instead of the enemy slightly to her left that's right fucking beside you. So you end up having to roll around trying to get that enemy directly in front so Senua will target him instead of the guy just chilling on the other side of the damn room. And even this doesn't add too much in the way of challenge. It's just dumb and mildly annoying. And speaking of dumb and annoying, there's the puzzles. Jumping Jiminy Christ, the puzzles. The other mechanic they shoehorned in to avoid a walking simulator are various time gate and optical illusion puzzles that are supposed to represent Senua's visual hallucinations and such. But the thing is, insofar as gameplay is concerned, they're time gate and optical illusion puzzles, and not particularly challenging ones at that. The time gate puzzles are just essentially altering various elements you see through the gate, like making a wall disappear, You walk through the wall, unlock a door, go back out, walk back through the gate to put the wall back, walk in through the door. It's that simple. The optical illusion puzzles are slightly more challenging, mainly because they are accompanied by various flashes of bright lights and multicolored dithering effects that mess with my light sensitivity. Yeah, the game was made for sufferers of mental illness, but don't give a fuck about folks with chronic migraines or, heaven forbid, epilepsy. Other than that, have you seen the new Kong movie? Remember the scene where the old army guy is explaining Kong to the team, and it shows this mosaic of stones that, when viewed from a certain angle, forms a picture of Kong's face? Yeah, that's what these puzzles are. You walk around in circles trying to make items in the environment join up in just such a way from your perspective that they match a given shape. You hit R2, it lights up matching the shape, and then you move on to the next boring and migraine-inducing shape search. Aside from that, you spend the majority of your time walking from point A to point B, looking at things and slowly piecing together the story via visions, flashbacks, voices, narration, and the lore stones. Yes, friends, to pad the game out, they added a sort of collectible. These small, round stones, usually found mounted on pillars, that when looked at with the R2 button, give you a piece of an old Viking story. There are around 44 of these scattered across the brief linear adventure, and heaven forbid that you should miss one, because past various certain points of the game, there is no backtracking. There's also no way to keep multiple saves. It auto-saves, so no way to just load up previous saves and grab what you missed either. If you're a trophy hunter and you miss a lore stone after defeating the first two pathetically easy bosses, you're going to have to beat the whole game and start a new one. You'll still have all the lore stones you did find, but you're going to have to replay the game up to the point of the stones that you missed. I hope for your sake you didn't miss the last handful at the end. And speaking of the end, some of you may have noticed that I said earlier there were 3 boss fights. And I know some of you who actually think this piece of shit is Game of the Year material are saying, excuse me, 7th, but there are clearly 4 boss fights? Well, no, there's not. There are 3. Spoiler alert! This is a spoiler alert. A spoiler alert is going on. It is still going on. Beware if you haven't beaten this game. I am about to spoil the ending. Spoiler alert. You still there? Okay, so at one point you run into this giant bald naked chick on a bridge who nearly kills you. The game sets this up as the final big bad boss of the game. You have to win the 4 shard challenges to get a special sword powerful enough just to beat this huge-ass naked bald alien from Star Trek the Motion Picture boss, whom you later learn is the darkness that possessed your mother, or if you're looking at it from the message point of view, represents Senua's resentment towards her mother of both passing the illness to her and then never helping her to cope with it, and thus being the direct cause of all of Senua's misery. So you finally get to this boss, who's standing there, waiting for you off in the distance, and the game blocks your way with a few more fights against the same 5 or 6 guys, and then you finally make it to the final boss's platform, and you think, at last, some challenge. Until you notice that your weapon doesn't harm her at all. Then you notice that she's not attacking you and is just kind of standing there. Then you notice that all she does is spawn more of those same 5 or 6 bad guys. Then you notice 15 to 20 minutes later that she's never going to stop spawning them. And then you notice that the voices whispering in your head just keep saying, just give up, just let go. So you let them knock you down, and you lay there and let them kick your ass. Your quest, your mission, your everything. The whole 6 hours you've spent to get to this point, and you just lay down and take it up the keister. Then you get a cutscene of your weird, bald, naked, burned mom trying to explain things. Then you die. Then you don't die and you're alive again, and you're the only one standing there while your mom is the one lying dead on the floor. And oh great, here comes my fucking migraine again. Look, there are obvious positives to this game. The designs are gorgeous, the graphics are astounding for such a small team, the music is well done, and the controls do what they're supposed to do. But that is not enough to make this a satisfying experience, even at the reduced price. I've bought $20 games on PSN that give you more gameplay and a longer story to boot. You guys have heard me talk about when you stick a pink ribbon on a turd, you still just end up with a pretty looking piece of shit. Well, here you go. I present to you Exhibit Hellblade. Strip away the cutscenes and snippets where you have no control over Senua, and you could blast through this game in about 4 hours. Look, I wanted to be more impressed with this game, and it definitely shows how far Ninja Theory's tech has progressed. But if you're going to try to get more mainstream financial success for your thought-provoking indie piece, you need to bring more than this to the table. Hellblade feels like the shareware version of a visually stunning, fuller, richer game we're never going to get. And for that, and in mourning of that lost potential, but mostly because they tried to make this game into two totally different experiences and failed at both, I'm giving it the highest score a DBTS can get. Hellblade gets a 4 out of 7.